Hey there, welcome to saas.unbound, brought to you by saas.group. I'm your host, Anna Dana, and this is the show where we chat with inspiring founders and experts to get an inside scoop on how they made their business a success. And today with me, Jason Fried, co-founder of 37 Signals, Basecamp, Hey.com, book author, watch collector, parent, partner. I can go on and on. You're wearing many hats, and it's fascinating to learn how you're able to build a very successful company while doing that. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, great to see you here. I've even reached out to my audience on LinkedIn to see like what people would want to talk to you about, and lots of fascinating questions. And then I went to Twitter and searched for like what people are looking for regarding you. And one of the funnest questions that came up was, why is it fried and not fried? And
Not my choice. That's just how it is. I don't know.
so,
It's definitely spelled fried, but pronounced freed. Yeah, I don't know. I think
yeah.
probably actually truly my I don't know how many great grandparents ago, but I think when they came to the U.S. they shortened it, and I think it would have probably been more obvious what it was when the whole name was longer. So I think this is just sort of what we're left with.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. We'll go with it. All right. So the first question may be a little bit not so obvious, but I was just reading through your blog, and I know exactly on May 10th, you wrote something about AI, about the fact that AI is fascinating. It's here, but what I think about it is you have to watch out. You have to sit back, play with it, but don't really rely on it heavily. So, and it's been 6 weeks, and I'm saying that because that's your usual cycle. So, did something did something change, or are you still solid on that mindset?
I still think it's the right mindset. I think it's very early on. It's fascinating. I think you should meet it with curiosity. What bugs me about sort of the narrative right now is that people are being told they're already behind. I mean, this thing is brand new, and it's like, well, if you're not on top of it, you're already behind or you're falling behind. I just don't think that's a really good place to put people. I don't think it's a good mindset. So I'm meeting with curiosity, paying attention to it, seeing it evolve, seeing it change. And if it makes sense to bring it into our stuff at some point, we'll do that. If it doesn't, we won't. But I don't think anyone really knows like the best use cases yet and where it's really going. So, pay attention, play with it, enjoy it, have fun, look at it as a toy and a tool. These are two good things that can go together. Oftentimes people think toy means it's like not powerful or something, but toys are wonderful things. So I think it is a toy and I think it is a tool, and that's a good way to look at it. And that's where I'm at right now at this point.
All right. Are you
Yeah.
using it in any way for any of the businesses? Is there any way to play with ChatGPT while working on Basecamp?
I've used it. I've explored playing with it around helping me write, again, more out of curiosity. So I'd write an essay, I'd write something on my blog, and I would just give it to ChatGPT and say, like, what would be a good headline for this? Give me 10 headlines for this. Like, give me 10 headlines with 5 or fewer words. Sharpen it up a bit. I'm sort of curious about like how it would read what I wrote and what its interpretation of it would be and how it would summarize it into 5 words. I haven't used anything that it's produced, but I find it to be a fascinating exercise to just see what it does with something that I've written. So I don't use it to write something for me. I like to write, so I wouldn't want to do that. But I do like it as a lens or a mirror, as a reflection on what I've written and getting its take on that. So that's been kind of fun. But nothing that I don't think I've actually used anything that's produced other than, use it for myself, for my own thinking.
Okay, makes
Yeah.
sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
All
Sure.
right. Well, since we already started on like the whole 6 week cycle, first thing I want to know is, where did 6 week come from? Why is it six? Why is it not 2 or 10?
It just evolved. We used to work with this is, 10, 15, 20 years ago. We used to just work. Things would take as long as they would take. And then, you find out some of the downsides of that. And there's some upsides and some downsides. And then at some point you time box some things. And I think we used to do things for many, many months, or we would do things quarterly. And What you eventually find out, of course, is that work expands to fill the time available, which I think is that Parkinson's law? I'm not sure which law that is. There's some law called something, and work expands to fill the time available. And so you give something 3 months, it takes 3 months. And you kind of realize, well, what if we gave it 2 months? Well, guess what? It takes 2 months. And the extra month we would have gotten from going an extra month, like what would we really get out of that? Well, the things we were finding that we were getting out of it weren't really worth it. And in fact, it would be better to get it done in 2 months and then have an extra month to work on something else. Or we get more stuff packed into a year that way. And so we just kind of kept reducing that time frame. And then eventually 6 weeks felt like the right amount of space, right amount of time to be able to still do something meaningful, but to always see the end from the beginning. So you always feel a sense of this isn't going to last forever, which is good, especially when you're working on something that you don't really love, because we sometimes have to work on things we don't love. You just have to work on things that are necessary sometimes. And it's nice to go into it going, it's going to be over pretty soon anyway. It's also good because it keeps you honest. It keeps you focused on the scope and keeps you focused on the thing that you're making. Like, what does this really need to do? We don't have any slop time here. We can't mess around with something it doesn't need to do. What does it really need to do? So it really gets you to focus on the essence or the epicenter. And it gives us a chance to reconsider what we want to do with the product, every month and a half, which is a wonderful time frame. We can commit to something, focus on it, get it done, and then reconsider. This is important because one of the problems with doing things that take a long period of time is that you feel a lot of pressure to make sure you're doing the absolute right thing because you only get a few swings a year, or maybe one swing a year to choose what you're going to do. We get 6 or 7 or so swings every year to decide what we're going to do because we have 6 weeks at a time, and then we take these 2 weeks off in between. So it just feels right. It feels right for us. We've rarely had to extend something beyond the 6 weeks in a material sense. There's been a couple projects that have taken 2 cycles to get done. But typically it's, you're done within 6 weeks. And that's, by the way, max. Most things are done in a couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks maybe. But the bigger features, the bigger ideas are done in 6 weeks. And just to be clear, in case people are curious, because everyone always asks this follow-up, which is, well, you can't build a whole product. Like, you didn't build hay in 6 weeks. No, we didn't. We stacked a bunch of 6-week cycles back to back to back over a year plus to build that product. But we still worked 6 weeks at a time and decided what we're going to do every 6 weeks.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. All right, it wasn't my follow-up question.
Okay.
My follow-up question was about the fact that you also each project that you have 2 people working on it. You have a programmer and a designer, right? And that's kind of like the usual setup for any new startup, right? It's whether a programmer, a designer, a programmer and a product person. It's almost never a programmer and marketer. So in your case, not having a marketer there in this bubble, why such a decision? Why isn't there a person that knows not only how it's going to be built and how it's going to look, but also how it's going to be sold later?
That's a good question. That part of it is part of the decision to build the feature in the first place. So when I'm thinking about building a feature or coming up with an idea for a feature, or we're batting around an idea, I'm always thinking in my head, how will I tell the story of this thing, this feature? So it's kind of baked into it. But our other feeling is that everything is marketing. So how well something works is marketing. Customer service is marketing. The name of the button that you use is marketing. The clarity that you have in a feature or the confusion is marketing. It could be bad marketing, right? There's bad marketing too. So everything is that. But from the very beginning, I'm thinking about what is this adding to the product? What story can we tell around this feature? And sometimes there's not much. It's just like, well, this is just something it needs to do because like we need this. But I'll give you a quick example. Like, we added recurring to-dos not too long ago. So yeah, let's say you have a bill to pay every 2 weeks or whatever, right? This is not like a breakthrough idea, right? But you build it and then you have to figure out how you're going to talk about it. I mean, you can just say we added recurring to-dos, or you could say, imagine you have a bill to pay every 2 weeks. Now, before you'd have to make a new to-do every 2 weeks. Now you can just make it once. Like that's, is that marketing? I don't know, but it's how you present the idea. So that's something I'm thinking about. That's something a few of us who are creating these ideas are thinking about. But I don't put that down to the team, because their job is to build the feature, and then my job or someone else's job is to explain the feature. But it is part of the thinking when we're considering how to do this.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Interesting. So,
And actually, can I add something to this?
sure.
When building a new product, this is primarily what I'm thinking about. So we're building a calendar for Hey right now. I've sort of mentioned this in passing, so maybe this is like my first official mention of it. But
It's a launch.
yeah, well, it's going to be a little bit, but we're working on it. And there's lots of calendars. So one of the things that we want to make sure that we launch with is some real novelty. And not novelty just to make something different, but we want to add some new ideas to the industry. It's the same way we did with Hey. When we launched Hey, there's a lot of email thing. People are very used to email. Hey is a very different take on email, and our calendar is going to be a very different take on calendaring. So when I'm thinking about the initial set of features, there are many things that this calendar probably eventually has to do, but initially will not do, because we want to focus on more of the novelty initially to set it apart from the rest, because that is part of the story. So I'm thinking about the feature set that we're creating also is being wrapped into the story, and which features will make a good story. How can I tell an interesting story about the product initially? And then we can backfill some of the more table stakes, basic stuff that we know it needs to do later. But just building a calendar on par with everyone else is doing everything everyone else is doing, it's not much of a story there. So we want to separate. We want to initially make a point that this is a different thing. So the marketing is a big part of the feature selection for the initial V1. And that's something that comes up frequently when building a new product. It's less so when building individual features, but we are still thinking about the story as we're making the features.
Right, but you're also kind of using building on public. It's not like you're talking on Twitter about everything that goes into this calendar, but hey, you talked about it before, you talked about it now on the podcast. So there are people that are going to learn about this already, right? So marketing started even before anyone knew that the calendar is coming.
Yeah, and we will get, as we get closer to launch, we will of course be more specific. I'm being very general right now, partially because we don't even know what it's going to be. We don't know. We don't we work 6 weeks at a time. So I know what we're working on these 6 weeks. I don't know what the next thing we're going to build is. We don't have a full plan. There's not a list of things that needs to do these 22 things. And once it does those 22 things, it's going to ship. It'll ship when we feel it's ready, 6 weeks at a time. So I can't even talk more specifically about it. I just know that the things we're focusing on right now are more of the novelties, the new ways to think about time, the new approaches to the way people look at their day. These are the things we're focused on initially. But yeah, as we get closer, we'll reveal more, we'll share more, tell more stories about it, show more interesting screenshots of it. And the things we're going to show will be very intentional. And because they can be wrapped into a story. So that is a big part of it for us. Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
And this is not obviously the first story of building in public. And a lot of founders are a bit afraid of the concept, right? They would share something, but maybe hide the secret sauce, or like hide exactly like how many hours or how many 6 week cycles it took, right? So in your case, when you first started this approach, like showcasing something, telling people what you're building, how you're doing this, was there a fear that somebody's gonna take it, somebody's gonna be the first, and how to overcome it, and is it even feasible to like think about that?
Yeah. It's never been a fear, because I mean, you're just fortunate if anyone's paying attention at all. And in most founder situations, if you're starting something brand new, no one's paying attention. So no one's sitting there waiting to take your idea when no one knows who you are. It's just not even a thing. I think you get more and more, I can see people getting more and more nervous about it. The more successful they get, the more reach they have, because then they think people are paying attention. But the truth is, no one really cares until you have the thing that's real. Like, you can talk about these things, you can get excited about it, but it's all vaporware and it doesn't really matter until you actually make the real thing. And everyone else is focused on their own thing. People aren't sitting around wondering what to do next. Like they're already building their own stuff. So it's not like someone's going to see something that you put out there and drop everything they're doing to do your idea. Everyone thinks their own ideas are the best ideas. And then again, like if someone does something you're working on, whatever, it's already been done too, unless it's brand new out of nowhere, which is incredibly rare. I could point to 10 other examples of someone doing something already that's similar. So it's not like you're really ever bringing something thoroughly unique to the market. Sometimes I suspect that happens, but very rarely. So I'd be more afraid of people not knowing who you are and what you have than being afraid of someone taking your secrets. I mean, this is something we've believed from the beginning. Even in one of our initial books, I think it was in Getting Real. If it wasn't in Getting Real, it was in Rework. This idea that we emulate chefs. So chefs write cookbooks and they share their recipes. Like this is what chefs do: is they make food and they're saying, here's exactly how to make this thing that I make and sell in my restaurants. Now you would think that chefs would be afraid to do that because God, if someone knows all my recipes, well, they're going to then just open up a restaurant next to mine, make the exact same food I make and put me out of business. That has never happened in the history of restaurants, probably. It's not an actual fear. Their fear is no one's going to even know I make good food. Like I'd rather people try to make my food and then come to my restaurant and see how it's really made and taste my version of it and get the word out about who I am and how I cook and what I believe about food. So that's what we try to do. We emulate chefs. We share our recipes. Our recipes are how we work, how we market, how we hire, how we think, how we design, and we share them in different versions. Sometimes it's in a book, sometimes it's on Twitter, sometimes it's on LinkedIn, sometimes it's in a video, whatever it might be. Sometimes it's here. But I would never be afraid of sharing the things that we're working on. The timing is important, though. What I don't want to do is share things too early when I can't deliver on those things. I also don't want to share things that we end up not doing because then we've made people feel like we've made a promise to them. So we're very careful about deciding what's actually going to happen. And the only way to really do that is to really get close to launch and know what's going to make it into V1.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I think that's very logical. Actually, about about the book about Getting Real, one of the founders of the company that we acquired earlier in saas group, Tower, asked me to tell you that Getting Real was one of the things that actually pushed them to create the company and bootstrap it. So
That's great. I'm
thank you
so
for
glad to
that.
hear that.
Thanks for the inspiration. You know, it's a great company, great founders. So
Oh, great. I'm so glad to
yeah.
hear that. Yeah. It's always wonderful to hear that, especially Getting Real, which was, I think came out in like, I don't even know when that was, 2000, mid 2000s, 2006, something like that. 8. I don't know. I think it was 6. I don't know. But yeah, it's great. Great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. No, I mean, when I heard about that, I was super, super happy. Okay, another question is about asynchronous work and the fact that, you know, it's the king now and how you're very strict about not having meetings or having very few of those. So what I want to get down to is, yeah, okay. So I have very few meetings and I love it. I have very focused work every day. Maybe, I don't know, it's not 8 hours, obviously, because then you're exhausted and the next day you don't do anything. But 3, 4, perfect. I'm very happy about it. Um, but if you're, say, in a 6-week cycle, there's you, there is your designer, you kind of have to be always on the same page. I'm assuming it's a very fast paced work, very intense. Um, and well, you're not supposed to meet. Uh, how to structure work in a way and communication in a way that, you know, you do not spend the same hour or two that you would spend in a meeting just writing to each other, trying to get the person to understand what you want. So how much actually this no meeting thing saves in time?
Yeah. So when I think of meetings, I typically think of many people gathered around to have a conversation. Or actually, not a conversation, sorry, just many people gathered around. When two people talk, it's a conversation. So two people working on a project will talk to each other. Um, but it's primarily still done initially asynchronously, and they're showing work to each other. So a great way for a designer to interact with a programmer is for a designer to deliver a design, and for a programmer to hook something up, and for them to then use it together and talk it through. So typically we'll talk about things once there's something to use, something to look at, something to explore. And then conversations kick off. Sometimes they're asynchronous, sometimes they're real time in a chat room, sometimes they're on just the telephone, like audio. You don't need video to talk to someone necessarily, right? Sometimes it's video because there's screen sharing. What we try to avoid, though, is having more than two people on these things. I look at them as phone calls, two people having a conversation. That's really what it is. So as much as necessary is how often that happens. But so the problem with meetings traditionally is that you pull a bunch of people off work, unrelated work often, and then you tell everyone basically to stop working for an hour, and six people get together to have a discussion about something. To me, that's incredibly inefficient, especially when you're working across time zones and you have remote teams, which we do. And so, I think the point is to be flexible and to do what makes sense. But the thing that's really important is to always have something concrete to discuss, versus being abstract. What ends up happening when two people are having conversations that are abstract about something that doesn't exist yet or something they can't look at is they often reach what we call an illusion of agreement. This idea that you and I agree, we think we agree on something, and then we set off and do the work, and then we come back later and look at it and go, that's not what I thought. That's not what I thought. I thought we had this discussion. I thought we agreed. Well, we agreed on an illusion because we couldn't see what we were actually working on and discussing. So that's why we always try to get real with the work. That's where the name of the book, Getting Real, comes in. Get real with something and then talk about it if necessary. And again, the medium doesn't matter so much. But the nice thing about asynchronous primarily is that when we talk about asynchronous, we talk about writing something up in detail. So it's not like posting a chat line and waiting 8 hours for someone to get back to you. It's like writing up something with a screenshot or thought, or kind of long form, letting someone absorb that and then get back to you later. So that's kind of how it goes for us.
Okay, so it's like very advanced customer support. I have this, so you have to look at it and then get back to me.
Yeah, I think in general, when you have something real to look at, you can both look at it or use it, whatever. It may not be something that's artistic to look at. It might just be a thing, or like it can be as basic as like, how does this scroll? Let's say you're building a chat thing or something, and someone, you scrolled up and back in the transcript, and then someone types something new. Like, what should happen then? Should it snap down to the new thing? Should it stay where it is? If it stays where it is, should there be an indication that there's something new? Where should the indication be, at the bottom, at the top? And so someone would build some version of it, not prototyping it in some prototyping tool, because that's not real. We'd build the thing and suggest, what do you think of this? And then they might use it together and go, let's play with it together. You know what? This doesn't feel right. I'm expecting to be looking here, but this thing is over here. Can we move it there? And they might move it in real time and then reload and look at it again together. So those are the kinds of conversations that happen in real time when there's something to look at. But the prior conversations are typically not real time. They're heads down. I'm going to get this thing built. Let's talk about this. Let's get it done. Then let's meet or discuss it by using it together and then making decisions in real time.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
that makes sense. All right,
Yeah.
so okay, another question, kind of about that, the same stuff. So again, when you work asynchronously or you have like very focused work for many hours, it means that you really know what you're doing, right? And you kind of have this much authority or this much seniority in the question, right? So you cannot really, I do not see like juniors just being deep in work for many hours without reaching out to anybody. So when you're hiring, are you mostly going for like someone who's had a ton of experience, a senior position, somebody who will be okay left alone? Or is there a place for more junior people who still have a lot to learn?
when we hire, we primarily hire people that are a little bit more senior, because we're a small organization and don't have a teaching infrastructure necessarily. It's just not how we're built. That said, we have 3 interns this year, this summer, and you could consider them junior, although they're quite smart and quite clever. And we throw them into the real work immediately. So they're involved in building real things. And one of the best ways to learn is to make something and then discuss it. So it doesn't help so much to work with someone who, like, I mean, the people we're bringing on even as interns, like they know their way around things. They can make stuff. They've made stuff in the past. So we want them to make something, and then we can talk about what they made. So they should have heads down, quiet time, focused work time to build something. And then they can, of course, ask for lots of help, and they can ask for help ahead of time. But they still need to do the work to get the critical feedback that helps them grow, versus having someone sit next to them and like do everything for them. Or people typically shouldn't be asking questions all the time about the work. They should just like try to figure it out as best they can and make something and then ask the questions. I find that to be the best way to do it. So, but in general, when we hire more senior people. But even senior people, the way we work is quite a bit different. So they have to get adjusted to the way they work. Here at 37 Signals, people have a lot of autonomy. There is no one is giving them a list of things to do. There's not a single team that has, no manager is saying, here's the 14 things you need to do today. It just doesn't work that way. People are independent and they have to figure out how to build the things they want to build on their own. Getting used to that is hard for some, but the best way to do it is just to dive in and do it. And then they find their way pretty quickly.
Okay. So
I think this is also, if I could add something, this is about being honest about your organization as well. So some people would say, like, that's not like, why don't you hire more junior people and bring them up and teach them? And it's a great point. And we've looked into that in the past, but we're simply just not built that way. And the way we work is not really conducive, I would say, to training in a traditional sense. So we need to have people who know their way around to begin with. And then we, of course, help people come up. But it's still through the course of actually doing the work itself and not through, let's say, a training program or something more traditional in that respect.
Right. So it's not like top to bottom kind of decision that, this is what you're going to do this week. Okay.
Yeah,
but
there is a direction that we think people should be heading, but they are in charge of deciding the actual work itself that needs to get done to get where they want to go. Yeah.
All right. So how do you basically, and of course, like you translate this vision in your books, in your talks, in your podcasts, in your blog, everywhere. But still, reading about it, listening about it, it's totally different from actually getting to work with you. How do you? And again, since you already said you don't really have a training program or anything, but how do you still integrate people into this and like show them that there is autonomy that they have to embrace and not be afraid of?
Yeah, one of the best ways to do this is since we only have 2-person teams, is to pair up someone new with someone who's been around for a long time. So you might have a new programmer working with a designer who's been here for 12 years, or a new designer working with a programmer who's been here for 8 years or something like that. So even though there's just 2, it's typically not a good idea to pair up 2 brand new people who don't know the lay of the land. They don't know the methods. They don't know what they're expected to do and how they're expected to do it, especially if they've come from organizations that don't work this way, which is most organizations don't. I wish more did, but they don't. So teaming someone up, even if they're in different roles. So this is the other thing, is that you don't need to just learn from someone in your role. Like, a programmer doesn't just only have things to learn from other programmers. They have things to learn from designers and vice versa. So that's the way we primarily do that. And then we pair 2 people up to do a project, typically one veteran, one newbie. And then at some point, depending on how often we hire, everyone becomes more comfortable and they can then run on their own with 2 people who've been working together or working here for a year is actually good enough because they have enough history under their belts and they've shipped many things because we work in 6-week cycles. But so by the time you've been here for a year, you've shipped 6+ meaningful things, which is really a great great set of work to have under your belt, and at that point you're pretty damn experienced with how we work. So it doesn't take long for someone to become a bit of a veteran, but that's a very important thing initially.
All right.
Yeah.
Something that I read from you, and I cannot remember where exactly, but it was about firing. And this is inevitably another thing that happens in any business. Um, so you hire senior people, you give them autonomy, you give them space to be really free and creative about what they're doing. But well, sometimes something happens, people have to leave, or you have to say goodbye to them. And this is something, again, that we talked about here on the podcast a few times. Usually, this is something that in the end of the podcast, I have a question about the biggest win and the biggest failure. Is considered a failure for a lot of founders, especially at the very early stages when someone leaves. So how do you approach that if people are leaving, or if people are not just a good fit? So how do you do that?
Yeah, typically, people have about a year to find their way and for us to find our way with them. So obviously, it's a mutual thing. Some people just don't like an organization or don't find this is the place for them, and that happens. And some people might leave early because of that. Other people might stick around and see how it develops. The same thing is true on the company side. Someone's new, you got to give them space to find their way and fit in. But at some point, and we consider that point to be roughly about a year, it should be clear that they're going to last or not. And this doesn't mean that they're as good as they're ever going to be. People continue to grow, but you have to see that this person is the right fit for you, and they're the right, and they feel the same. Now, that doesn't mean a year is the first time we talk to people about this. Like, there's early reviews, people who are new are catching up with their team lead frequently. There's sort of more of a 90-day review period. There's a 6-month. There's these things that are happening along the way, right? So it's not this surprise out of nowhere. Although getting fired always does feel like a surprise, even though you're kind of talking along the way. But the fundamental, we try to boil things down to single questions if possible. And the best question I've ever found when evaluating someone at the 1 year mark is, knowing what I know now, would I hire this person again? That sums up so many things. It's such a wonderful way to really get to the fundamental question, which is, does this person fit here? Are we excited to work with this person? Are they excited to work with us? Would I hire them again? And often it's in a heartbeat, like, absolutely. If it's like, I'm not so sure, then you really have to dig deep there, because why is it you're feeling that way because you don't want to let someone down? Letting someone go is incredibly hard. It's hardest for them, of course, but really hard for you, hard for the organization. You've got to really get there. And when there's that level of doubt, it typically doesn't turn out well. You typically are then fighting to keep someone around, and you're making excuses and whatnot. It's not a good place to be. So we just want to be like, this is this Derek Sievers thing, which is like hell yeah or no, basically. I don't know if you're familiar with that thing that he's written up. It's a wonderful little essay. I think he has a book about it too. But it's kind of that. And that's where we get to in the first year. We don't say hell yeah or no. We say, like, would we hire this person again? And it should be an enthusiastic hell yeah, basically. And when it's not, you have to explain why it's not. Again, it shouldn't be a surprise, but even though it will often feel like one because it's a shock. But it should be clear that the trajectory has sort of ended at that point for somebody. There's performance improvement plans because sometimes people have been here for 3 or 4 years, and you might see their performance wane or plateau or whatever. And sometimes someone needs to get on a performance improvement plan to kind of kickstart themselves. Sometimes they need a little bit of a sabbatical to reset because there's something else going on in their life, or they just feel a little bit burned out. So there's things you do at different points with different people, depending on how long they've been here and what the situation is. But the first year is very critical for us, and we just have to make sure we want to hire someone again, because that's really what you're doing. At the end of year 1, the beginning of year 2, you're rehiring someone is the way we're looking at it. And that should be a pretty clear, just like it should be very clear cut when you hire the person that this is the person. We want them here. It should feel that same way at the beginning of year two.
All right. So
Yeah.
honestly, like looking at what you're producing, like the blogs that you're writing and what David does, it felt not as strict.
These are conversations. So there's no like,
Okay.
there's no, there are no like numbers to hit. There's no KPIs. There's no none of that.
Okay.
There's none of that. There's not like you need to have progressed in these different ways that we can quantify over. It's conversations about actual work, and the team lead who's responsible for that person, or the department head, or however it's set up, like they need to be intimately familiar with this person's work, how they work, their style. And that comes through conversations. It also comes through working directly with this person. It's very obvious to everybody where someone's at, actually. And those are the kinds of performance reviews we do. It's not a formalized process. But there are some formal conversation points that we try to stick to roughly within specific timeframes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
coordinate people, something
Yeah.
that you preach. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So a couple of questions that actually came from LinkedIn. Since we talked already about like short cycles and shipping fast and all that. So how do you? And every feature is kind of another launch, right? You're still trying to see how you're going to sell it, who is it going to be for. So is there a measure for this kind of product market fit, and what is it for you, and when do you start at least trying to measure it? Is it before you're building it, while, or after?
Yeah, I would say probably unusual in this respect, in that we don't measure anything when it comes to like, did this feature move the needle? I shouldn't say anything. There are moments when we do some of that. When specifically the feature is designed for that purpose. Like if we're trying to improve onboarding, it's about onboarding. It's about like getting more customers, signed up and whether or not they're sticking. There's some of that stuff. So in those specific cases, yes, but we don't apply that to everything. Like if we add recurring to-dos, like we're going to add recurring to-dos because we know we need to add recurring to-dos. And I'm not going to measure whether or not people are using them or not. Like they are, or they aren't. Like they're there now. Not everyone's going to use them. And what does it mean to measure them? Like, I don't know. What is my expectation of how many people are going to use these? I don't know. And does it matter if someone uses it twice a year? Well, if that's all they need it and it's there, great. But if you're like, well, someone should use this on average 8 times a year because of some arbitrary, like, that's my problem with measuring things like that, is like, what does it really mean? And you're like, well, 22% of people use this. Like, okay. And you're like, well, we were hoping for 25. Like, why are we hoping for 25? Like, where'd that number come from? There's a lot of these like things that people make, these targets, and you try to hit them. And I don't know. My point is, it's more of a holistic approach. Like, we're trying to improve the product as a whole over time. And we're looking at sales. We're looking at profitability. How's the company doing over time? It's a much bigger thing than trying to measure individual movements, unless, of course, the individual movements are designed specifically to see movement. Like when we design recurring to-dos, I don't expect that to move the needle, but I think it's an important part of the product. We just improved this feature in Basecamp called Lineup, which is a way to look over. It used to be just look over the next few weeks to see what projects are in play. Now you can move forward in time and backwards in time, and you can add different markers and stuff. This isn't really going to move the needle, but it's about rounding out the product and rounding out the feature in a way that we've heard from customers that we also believe it should be better at. But there are some things that are about moving the needle. Signups. We're about to launch a new version of the Basecamp.com homepage. We hope that moves the needle a little bit. So we'll kind of pay attention to some of that stuff. So it's about applying it in the right places, and not this dogma that everything needs to be measured and you need to know whether or not it was worth doing something. You should feel whether or not it was worth doing something, and then other things you should know. But I don't think you need to know everything, as long as you feel most things. That's my take on it.
Right. I think a lot of founders are just a little bit afraid of like building features that are not used. Then you just overcomplicate your product and you have a lot of features that no one wants. So I think that's what the question is about.
Yeah, to me, that's an upfront conversation, though. Like, why are you building things that you don't think anyone's going to use? Like, where do the ideas for these things come from, and what is your comfort level with that, and what does it mean to get used? I mean, in some cases, it's like there's a bunch of administrative things that probably don't get used very often, but like you might need to have them. How often do people really change their credit card? Like, not probably that often, but you probably need to have that. Things like that, like would you remove that from the product because it's only used 3% of the time? No, you actually need that in the product probably. So I know I'm being a bit simplistic here, but to me, the conversation needs to happen up front. And I don't think frankly, I don't think constant reflection on the work that you've done is worth the effort most of the time. I think you're better off trying to make good decisions, the best decisions you can, and you move on from there and you go on to the next thing and continue to improve. And then look at the whole thing. Are we making progress? Is the product getting more traction? I don't know exactly what it is that's causing this, but the decisions we're making are causing this. Let's make more decisions in the right direction. I just don't like this. I don't like piecing everything out. I don't think things can be isolated in that way, frankly, as often as we think they might be. There might be cases where that is true. I don't think in most cases that's the reality, though. I think things are a part of a whole, and you should look at the whole and say, is the whole going in the right direction? Yeah.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. I think, yeah, again, there is this fear that we're just going to shoot and try to kill whatever flies. But, what if there's nothing there?
Yeah.
All right. Just a couple more questions. The first one, the one I mentioned, what's so far been the biggest win and the biggest failure for
Like
the
overall in the
company,
company.
or yeah, or
Yeah.
maybe for you as the founder personally, what felt like
Um,
it?
yeah. I mean, this is a big question because there's a lot of things that come to mind. I think whenever we stray away from our fundamental ideals of um, trying to build simple things that work really well, I think we make mistakes. So when we start to over measure things, frankly, getting back to the over measuring things, we start to measure things that don't matter. Or we start to set out these big goals. Like I can tell you a couple things we've done in the past few years that just like we should have known better. We've set up, we a number of years ago, we had this target, like, let's get to this revenue target. What was the revenue target? Some big round number with zeros after it. And we tried to do a bunch of things to try to get there. And then we realized, like, we don't like any of the things we're doing to try to get there. And what does it matter if we got there or not? Like, what does it really matter? And so it's very easy to set up these false goals for yourself. And we've done this a few times. And I consider those to be some of the biggest failures in our business, which is chasing things that are artificial for no good reason other than we think we're supposed to. And that might seem like a small detail in a sense, but it's actually quite a big detail because it can take you off your game in ways that are unnecessary, and it can make you function in a different way that's not natural. I think it's very important for every organization to find their natural path, their natural way. And when you stray away from that, it's like water finds the path of least resistance. You need to be water in that respect and figure out what your topography is and stick with that, I think, because once you start to do things that aren't really who you are, it takes so much effort, so much more effort to make very little progress. And those are the moments I regret the most, I would say. As far as the most exciting moments to me are product launches. And also, actually, frankly, like coming up with just the right name for something. I love naming things. So when the right name snaps into place, it's very, it's enthralling. It's like, oh my God, that's the name. So I love naming things. I love launches. I love new things, which is not how it's always been. I think like for a long time we were focused on maintenance and maintaining things, and we still are. But I think we've realized that we're builders. We want to make new stuff. And so we're currently making two new things, one of which I mentioned to you already, and something else we're making a brand new thing. And that's really exciting. So I think changing your mind is another wonderful moment in an organization. And I think we've managed to do that a few times. And those are also really wonderful moments.
Okay,
Yeah.
wonderful. I think no one has still uncovered the mystery behind Maersk, and
Why it's named
and
that?
why it's named like that. Yeah,
You'll have to ask David that, but it has to do with shipping containers.
yeah.
And
Everyone
yeah,
thought so. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So, but that was David's thing. I was not involved in naming that. So you can talk to him about
Okay.
that.
All
Yeah,
right, but we finally got it. There you go.
yeah, yeah.
I just he would not reveal it, so
Oh, really? Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. I
No,
think I'm right about that. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. So yeah,
yeah. Okay.
yeah,
And I absolutely agree about the water thing. I think it's just the whole I'm not looking for like easy way out. You should always look for an easy way out. Like who likes complicated? Yeah.
David
So
and I talk about
perfect.
this a lot. I'm so on board with you on that. David and I talk about this a lot, that we're fundamentally lazy at the core, and that's a good thing to be, because you find yourself like, what's the simplest way of doing this? And it turns out that's actually usually the best way anyway. You don't want to leave a bunch of trash behind you in terms of like bad code or bad ideas that you have to mop up later. But yeah, just striving. I mean, there's some situations where striving for complexity is an interesting intellectual challenge. But since we like to make things, simple lets you make more things. I think things take less time. You can improve on things after you've launched them in really interesting ways. You can make more stuff because as I mentioned, things don't take as much time. There's something really gratifying and satisfying about finding the water way, the path of least resistance that does what it needs to do. I find that to be incredibly rewarding versus like the most complicated solution is in my opinion has very little reward in it. Frankly, that's just again, this is like everyone's got to find what their path, and we found ours, and I think whenever you stray from it, it's not that you shouldn't explore new things. I don't want anyone to think like you get stuck in your ways, but you should know what comes natural. You should know it's natural, and I think when you start breaking out of that, anything like any artificial systems tend to have all sorts of considered side effects, and then you have to like put something else in artificial to make up for the other artificial change you made. And I just think it's better to be natural if you can.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. And just one more question. Since
Yeah.
we started talking about simplicity and simplifying stuff, what's the hack that helps you to do any part of your work, any part of your job that's maybe unconventional, maybe super simple, but that works for you and that gets things done?
Yeah. I like to start with what something's not going to do. So you come up with a new idea. Well, what shouldn't it do? That always has helped me really narrow in ultimately on what's left, and what's left is what it should do. So I think when you start from the other way, which is like, what should this do? Well, it should do all sorts of things ultimately, but what shouldn't it do initially, I think, is the really important thing. And something I'm really been impressed with actually is, you know, uh, Meta just came out with Threads, today or yesterday, this new, and I'm so impressed, which is like a Twitter competitor or whatever, right? I've only had 3 hours to play with it, but I'm so impressed by the restraint. As a product person, when I look at something, I see all the decisions not to do things. So like there's a million things you cannot do in this thing yet. And when they're competing against something like Twitter, the pressure is typically on to have feature parity. You hear this a lot when people are competing with other products. We need to have feature parity. They didn't go there at all. They went with some fundamental parity, but they left a whole bunch of stuff out that isn't necessary and is proving not to be necessary right now. And I'm just so impressed by that approach to product development. And I think they did a really wonderful job of drawing lines around like, this is not going to do all these things yet. I'm sure it'll do these things eventually, but right now it doesn't matter so much. That to me is really good product stewardship and really good product thinking, and you don't see it that often. So anyway, that comes back to like, what should this not do? That's the question I ask myself.
Okay, I think it's a good one. I think, yeah. I started analyzing it while you were talking, and I thought, okay, so many times I had to ask myself that. Okay, next time.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll do.
But yeah,
Yeah, next time. There's always next time to get
there's
better, and we all
always.
all make the mistake. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's true. Well, thank you, Jason, so much. It's been an incredible conversation. I have a ton more questions left and a ton more questions I came up with while you were talking, but hopefully we can do it again sometime. Always happy to see you on Sauce and Bound.
yeah. Part two would be great. Let me know whenever you're ready. Thank you so much for having me on.
Sure. Thank you, Jason. Take care.
All right. See you around. Bye.
Oh.